Hello everyone. Ironblood as a faction rely heavily on paper ships to fill out their rank. As a launch faction, and the Germans in a game taking inspiration from World War II, it's an unfortunate necessity to keep them from falling behind their naval superpower colleague. Can't have the Germans look weak in a World War II game after all. Most of these paper ships come from the same place. Plan Z. A major naval armaments plan designed to combat the Royal Navy in the looming conflict. So, today, we're going to look at the scope of the plan, how much has and has yet to be implemented, as well as discuss whether it would have been successful if fully implemented in real life. Plan Z was a balanced fleet mainly centred around battleships, because Hitler, with a preference for commerce raiding rather than direct conflict with the monarchs of the seas, and retained a sizable U-boat fleet to go alongside. The Z plan was a large build-up expected to take the best part of 10 years to complete when it was approved in early 1939, taking far longer than the rest of the German effort, but Hitler assured war wouldn't break out until 1948, so it should be fine, right? Well, about that. Warships take a lot of time and money to build, and Germany wasn't doing so hot financially. And war did come, but far sooner than expected, so the plan got axed pretty early on. On to the plan itself. It called for 10 battleships, those being the existing Scharnhorst and Bismarck classes, joined by the plan's crown jewel, 6 brand new H-class battleships. These were to be supported by 3 O-class battlecruisers and 4 aircraft carriers, the Graf Zeppelin sisters and 2 more to a different design. Down from the big ticket items, there was to be 15 Panzerschiff, those being the 3 Deutschland class and a dozen new P-class. The 5 Admiral Hipper class would be all of the heavy cruisers and would be joined by 12 light cruisers, comprised of the existing Emden, the 3 Königsbergs, 2 Leipzigs, and 6 new M-class. On to smaller ships was the 22 Spey cruisers, all of which were to be new built. A further 38 new destroyers were intended, likely being based on the type 1936C and 1938B, if I had to guess. 54 new torpedo boats, totaling 90, which were only getting mentioned due to them encroaching on destroyer size and armament, and finally 249 U-boats, which is kind of irrelevant given how many the Germans ended up building. They don't need any help on that front. But would it have worked? Short answer, no. If they just magically got these ships, they'd been pretty competitive with the Royal Navy as built, with an advantage when it came to modern battleships, having 10 versus the Brits' 6. And between the heavy cruisers and Panzerschiff, they'd have them beat in big cruisers. But the Royal Navy has them beat almost everywhere else. There are as many illustrious class as the Germans would have carriers total, plus the Implacables, which were ordered pre-war and didn't get axed like the Lions, thanks to the shifting meta of naval warfare, and all the other carriers. Light cruise and destroyers, forget about it. That was a heavy focus of the Royal Navy during the Second World War, those numbers aren't even close. What is surprisingly close is the number of submarines. Plan Z called for 249 U-boats, massively down from what they actually produced during the war, putting them in a similar ballpark to the Royal Navy and its Commonwealth. However, this is not how any of this would go. The comparison of Royal Navy as it actually was versus Germany with Plan Z works for Azur Lane, because they based the ships on actually built ones or ones that were planned and either scrapped or cancelled. Real life doesn't work that way, because this entire comparison relies on the Royal Navy just sitting there and doing nothing, while Germany has another massive naval build-up in their backyard. It's hard to do a build-up like this in secret. Intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance, ISR, assets are gonna find out pretty quickly. We've been here before. We know how this goes. And how it goes is a naval arms race that is partially responsible for a world war. In a realistic scenario, the Lions don't get canned, losing Germans the advantage in new battleships. Doubly so when you consider that Vanguard might get some sisters in this scenario. The R-class would be scrapped, but as the 16-inch guns would still have development issues, and there are extra slipways, they may opt to build a few more using the freed up guns. There's also the chance of the Royal Navy catching wind of just what the Yamatos truly are, or of the Montana class, and laying down some super battleships of their own. They'd also actually build some heavy cruisers to counter all the Panzer ships running around. Whether that's some 12 9.2 inch gun monster or a Baltimore-like, I don't know. And also more escorts and destroyers to counter the U-boats. This is of course assuming either nation can afford to do this kind of build-up. Or that any outbreak of war in the Pacific doesn't cause a shift in shipbuilding priorities. But let's back it up a minute. Because the war doesn't start until mid to late 1940s if they do this, and that means it goes very differently. They'd now have to face not just a built-up Britain, but a built-up France as well. And in that case, they probably don't blitz them in 6 weeks like they historically did. And with the Marine Nationale now in the picture, less Royal Navy resources can be tied down in the Med fighting the Italians, and they can help keep the Germans in check. If the war does start in 1939, then they have a massive and expensive naval rearmament taking resources away from the ground forces and Luftwaffe, making replenishing losses and their own build-ups harder. Again, maybe they don't roll the Continental Allies in a couple of months. Then there's also the case of 1941, where maybe they might try and start then, after Britain and potentially France also got their hands full with the Japanese, but I feel like that'd still run into the same problem of they're more built up. It might not go as well as it did historically in 39. It's just not a good idea to be a land power engaged in a land war, preparing to fight an island nation with the most powerful navy on Earth. Also, RAF Bomber Command is going to be looking at those shipyards and dock facilities the same way they did Dresden. Not to mention the fuel. Already something Germany struggled with, and a massive navy is going to make that so much worse. An H-class can store up to 8,700 tons of diesel oil each. Do you know how many tanks or fighters you can fill up with that much? I don't, but it's a fucking lot. You aren't blitzkrieging shit if everyone's out of fuel. So let's flip the script and ask. Instead of a dictator's compensation parade, Raider gets his U-boats. Does it work then? Still no. 300 U-boats and their crews don't just fall out of the sky. And it's so much easier to scale up production of smaller escort and anti-submarine warfare ships, like destroyers, than it is large capital ships, when ISR tells them that Germany is going dummy on U-boats. The U-boats were very effective early on, but if more countermeasures are built beforehand, I don't see it going as well. So, how much is in Azur Lane then? For battleships, we have 50%. The 4 real steel ships have all been around long enough to have wrinkles, and we also have Ulrich of the H-class. But I don't see this number rising particularly quickly. All the remains are UR H-class, and given that Ironblood is 2 for 2 on UR events being BPs, I doubt they'll be getting another one anytime soon. I hope. URBBs are oversaturated as is anyway. We've got 2 out of 3 O-class at the time of writing, just 1 more to go. Carriers is again 50%, with Graf Zeppelin and Peter Strasser. Carriers C and D are nowhere to be seen as of yet. On to Panzerschiff. We have 5 out of 15, 33%. That's 2 out of 3 Deutschlands, with Admiral Scheer remaining unaccounted for, and a quarter of the dozen P-class that didn't even make it to 1939. Heavy cruisers, we technically have all of them. One was sold to the Soviets to become Tallinn, and another converted to carrier, becoming Verza. CLs we're doing pretty well on, 8 out of 12. All we're missing is 4 more M-class. Scout cruisers we haven't even begun yet, 0 out of 22. And depending on whether they're treated as flimsy light cruisers or big destroyers, we might not see many for a while. They're a weird in-between of the two. EDs, we're not even close, we've still got plenty of wartime real steel before we need to think about Plan Z. Same goes for submarine, that was the Kriegsmarine's entire shtick. As I said, just, they don't need any help here. So that's Plan Z. When Germany said, what if we did high seas fleet, but again, at a time where we lack the infrastructure, money and quality designs that we had the last time. Honestly, the more surprising part of all this is there's actually still a fair bit of the plan we don't have yet. There's always been this looming running out of ships when it comes to Ironblood, but I think it's a bit further off than anyone is expecting. Especially when we count the non-Plan Z paper too. Or the unending swarm of submarines that no one cares about because their implementation is half-assed. But I've yapped enough today. I'll see you next time. Fair winds and following sea.